Our 20s can either be our best friend or our worst enemy when it comes to personal finance. Depending on how you handle this phase of your life, you can either be way ahead of the game, if not already financially independent, or in debt up to your eyeballs, having already declared bankruptcy once or twice. Perhaps the biggest determining factor between you ending up way ahead of the game or well behind where you'd like to be comes down to identifying and avoiding common money traps that can be a plague to early financial independence. Now, this is the first video in a two-part video series talking about major money traps to avoid in your 20s. I had to split this video into two parts because the script just became too long. So today we're going to be covering 3 major money traps that you'll want to avoid in your 20s, or really any age, and next week we'll be tackling 4 more money traps to avoid. With that being said, let's get started. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. The first common money trap to avoid in your 20s is excessive debt. I've already done a video on why I consider debt to be the #1 wealth killer, but it's still worth mentioning again here. Having too much debt limits your most powerful wealth-building tool, which is your income. And you may think that paying off your debt instead of investing would be a bad idea because compound interest is so powerful. And that's true, compound interest is powerful, but it can also work against you. You've probably heard someone mention the example of how you could start investing $100 a month from the age of 18 to 25 and then stop investing altogether, but still end up with more money than someone who started investing $100 a month at the age of 26 and kept investing until they were 65. That's a great example because it's a great way to illustrate the power of compound interest working for you. But with debt, compound interest is working against you. Debt requires minimum payments each month. That takes away from the money that you could be putting into your investments. And it generally forces you to get started investing later because it also increases the amount of money you need to save in order to have a fully funded emergency fund. And of course, it also increases the risk of financial ruin in the event of a job loss or some other catastrophe, as well as costing you money and interest. According to articles in Business Insider, CNBC, and Forbes, the average American carries about $9,000 in credit card debt, which is often split between several cards. They have $30,000 in student loan debt, and assuming a used vehicle was bought, a little over $21,000 tied to car loans. That's around $60,000 in total debt. And if we assume 18% interest on the credit cards and 4.5% interest on the other loans, the minimum payments could be roughly $900 a month. $900 a month in minimum payments translates to anywhere from $2,700 to $5,400 in additional savings that must be put into your emergency fund. If you were in that situation but only had $100 or $200 left over after expenses and debt payments every month, it could take you well over a year to get that emergency fund taken care of. And even assuming your emergency fund is taken care of, your debt could put a damper on your potential nest egg over time, as I detailed in my video on debt being the #1 wealth killer. So with that being said, how do we avoid this common money trap? First is, if you're lucky enough to not have any debt right now, research some strategies to ensure that you keep it that way. If you're planning to go to college, look into ESA and 529 plans. Look into scholarship opportunities, and don't be afraid to have a summer job and work during the school year part-time. Make sure that you always have an emergency fund. It should contain at least 3 to 6 months worth of expenses so that you never have to take on debt for those moments when life happens. Make sure you have insurance for those catastrophes that you wouldn't be able to cover with your savings. Health emergencies are a good candidate for this. And if you're already in debt, learn about how people have paid off their debts in the past. Then choose a strategy that's most likely to get you out of debt completely. 3 of the most popular strategies are the debt snowball, debt avalanche, and debt tsunami. I've done videos on all 3 of those, and they'll be linked in the description below. Another thing I would recommend looking into is the power of the debt snowflake. If you haven't heard, the debt snowflake is a strategy where you find ways to free up money, or just happen to find money, that you can put towards your debt payoff strategy. It's nice because it can work very well with any of the other 3 strategies I just mentioned, even if by itself it isn't game-changing. A second common money trap that you should avoid in your 20s, or really any age, is harmful external influence. You may not think this is a money trap, but it kind of is. In this day and age, there is so much fear and uncertainty being pushed out by the media and other external sources that it can actually affect your behavior when it comes to finances. One way this could affect your financial future is by causing you to hold off investing for a better time, which could have negative consequences. Take John, for example. He has $100 a month left over to invest. However, he's been listening to the news and has become very nervous about the future of the stock market. They're saying that a crash could occur any day now. John, like most of us, doesn't like the thought of losing any of his money. Therefore, he decides to wait for a better time to invest. Just to keep things simple, let's say that the investment John was looking at was valued at $100 a share, and it pays a 2% dividend each year. Over the course of the first year, John's investment loses 30% of its value and is now worth $70 a share. The market continues to drop the following year, and John's investment falls to $50 a share. At this point, John is happy that he decided not to invest because he would have lost 50% of his money, at least on paper. In the third year of this scenario, the market rebounds a little bit, with John's investment growing to $60 a share. That's definitely nice, but John continues listening to the news, and they still aren't sure that the worst of the crash is over. Therefore, John decides to wait a little bit longer before investing. John's investment continues to recover the next year, reaching $75 a share, and at this point, the worst seems to be over with, so John decides to invest. We are 4 years into John's journey, and thankfully, he has saved that $100 a month over the course of those 4 years, so he has $4,800 in his bank account. He invests it all and buys 64 shares of the fund that he's been following. He also receives that 2% dividend for the year. Since the share price was $75 at the time, the dividend will be worth $1.50 per share. That means that John will make $96 in dividends for the year. He uses that income to purchase even more shares, in this case an additional 1.28 shares. And over the course of the 5th year, the market and John's investment finally fully recovers. John's investment is worth $100 a share, and he invests his $100 a month throughout that year to end with a net worth of $7,728. That doesn't sound half bad, but what if John had just consistently invested instead of letting the news and other external forces influence his investing decisions? As it turns out, John would have been much better off investing during the crash as opposed to waiting. If John had invested his $100 a month over those 5 years and the market performed exactly as it did before, his net worth would end up being a little over $9,300. This is mainly because he's buying his shares when they're on sale, and is therefore able to buy more with the same amount of money. In addition, he's also getting income from dividends earlier than he did before. Those dividends grow over time and allow him to buy even more shares. And this creates a sort of investment snowball effect that John can ride as the years go on. In the end, what this translates to is an additional $1,600 in John's nest egg. Another way that harmful external influences could affect your financial future is by causing you to hold off starting a business or side hustle. This could lead to a lower monthly income that could be used to pay off your debts or invest and start building wealth. Even if the side hustle is very small, it can still be a big difference maker for your financial future, among other things that I've covered in previous videos. If you earn $500 a month from a side hustle, and invested that at an 8% rate of return, you would build some serious wealth pretty darn quickly. Even if that $500 a month was the only thing you invested, you would have over $1.75 million to your name 40 years from now. You could then withdraw that amount of money tax-free in retirement. According to the 4% rule, $1.75 million translates to an annual income of about $70,000 per year. That's not a bad retirement. So while there are risks involved with starting a business, there's also opportunity costs with not having some sort of side hustle. And those opportunity costs are especially large when you're young, simply because you have so much more time for the money you make early on to compound. If you are concerned with the perceived risks of starting a side hustle, consider going with some sort of a lean startup. That way, even if it does end up going in a direction that you didn't want it to, you could cut your losses with minimal harm done. Beyond fear and uncertainty, hype can also have an effect on your financial future. In some cases, this can actually be healthy, but in others, it can lead you to making decisions that you'll later regret. One big example of this would be buying a house you weren't prepared for, simply because the market is down, but it's expected to go up. If the market rises like expected, maybe this isn't the worst thing in the world because you could flip the property and move on to another option. But if the market ends up going down even further, then you could end up underwater on a home you already couldn't afford. So while you're not going to be able to avoid external influences entirely, and you wouldn't want to, as some of them can be very helpful, you do want to make sure that you avoid the ones that won't be helpful to you in reaching your goals as much as possible. The best way that I've found to do this anyway is to have a good financial plan with solid goals to shoot for. That way, anytime any of these things come up, you can ask yourself, does this message help me achieve my financial goals better than any other I've heard? If not, then you can just safely ignore the message and go with the one you already heard. This may lead to some situations where you miss out on some opportunities, such as being an early investor in Bitcoin, but it'll also ensure that you don't fall into the trap nearly as much, such as those who were late investors in Bitcoin. And particularly when it comes to investing, missing out on a big win is far less damaging than jumping into a big loss. This is a simple function of how the math works. Assuming this is an investment that you're not going to continuously add to, if you had $100 in an investment that loses 50% of its value, it would be worth $50. However, what kind of return would you need in order to get back to that original $100 value? It would be 100%, right? Because the $50 would have to double in value. However, if you had $100 in an investment that gains 100% of its value, it would be worth $200. But in order for that $200 to fall back to its original value of $100, how much of its value would it have to lose? Only 50%, right? So while there are opportunities that you just can't pass up, don't be afraid of taking it slow and steady. As our mothers always taught us, slow and steady wins the race. A third common money trap that you should avoid in your 20s is saving but not investing. Now don't get me wrong here, saving is important. It's very important. Saving gives us some money to use in case of an emergency, or when our investments are down and we need money fast. It's often better than investing when looking at the short term, simply because the markets are so volatile. So if you're saving up for a new used car, you may be better off saving than investing. However, it's not the best solution all the time. Financial independence and your retirement nest egg are a great example of this. If you're going to simply save for financial independence, it's going to take a lot of dough to make it in any reasonable time frame. For example, if John and Jane live on $40,000 a year, they would need about $1 million to be considered financially independent, according to the 4% rule. If they invested $500 a month and got an average return of 8% per year on those investments, they would be financially independent in about 34 years. However, if they were merely saving that $500 a month, it would take much, much longer. Let's say they put their money into a high-yield savings account that paid 2.5% interest. Under those circumstances, it would take them almost 67 years to become financially independent. So even if they had started saving $500 a month at the age of 18, they wouldn't reach financial independence until they're 85. If you ask me, that's just a bit too long. Even if they managed to save $1,500 a month, or triple what they were actually investing, they still wouldn't reach financial independence as quickly. In this case, it would take them 35 years to reach financial independence by saving. And for the record, at $1,500 a month and 8% per year return, they would be millionaires in 22 years had they invested instead of saved. So you can see how important it is to make sure that you're investing and not just saving, especially when it comes to larger and longer term things such as financial independence. But some people do have a tough time making the switch from saving to investing. The solution to this, at least in my experience, comes down to understanding yourself, and particularly your risk tolerance. Making sure you have a solid emergency fund that makes you feel comfortable in the event that an emergency actually occurs is important. The general rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, but some people do need more than that in order to feel secure enough to let themselves make the full switch over to investing. And that's perfectly fine. If you're living on $3,000 a month, but even the higher end 6-month emergency fund of $18,000 isn't enough to make you feel comfortable in the event of an emergency, then save a little more. Take a little extra time and save $20,000 or $25,000 and then begin investing. You can give yourself a double whammy positive effect by eliminating any debt you have, since that lowers the amount of money that you need to spend to survive every month, as well as giving you some money left over to invest when you're ready. If that's still not enough, then perhaps look into some umbrella insurance policies to give you some extra protection in the event of a major catastrophe. So those are 3 money traps to avoid in your 20s, or really any age. And like I said, this script ended up being way longer than I wanted it to be, so there will be a part 2 coming next week with 4 more money traps to avoid. If you want to see that, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you'll be notified when that video comes out. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.